chance I get, and I'll keep saying it until the end of this week. But it's been a very exciting time for us here, and we're delighted to bring you yet another high-quality session. This one proposed by InPlanet, which is a Brazilian-German enhanced rock weathering company, and we are here today to talk about a paper that InPlanet has led, an academic paper, which looks at, I'm going to get the words right, which looks at unlocking gigaton scale CDR with strategic tipping point frameworks. Now, forgive me for not having this exactly memorized yet. I am stepping in here for the other Chris. My name is Chris Sherwood. I'm the Secretary General of the Negative Emissions Platform, and I'm a last-minute replacement for Chris Neidl, the CDR lead from the High-Level Climate Champions, who is sick, possibly with COVID, and couldn't be here today. Is the sound okay? I see the cameraman is worried. It's okay, more or less. So, wishing Chris, the other Chris, a speedy recovery. So what I'd like to do is just start off with very quick intros. If each of you, the dear panelists, could just quickly introduce yourselves, and then we'll move into the structured questions that we've got for you. Maybe starting with Christina.
Can you hear me? Perfect. Thanks so much for having us here today. Yes, I'm Christina. I am the VP of Science and Research at InPlanet, and as Chris mentioned, we're a Brazilian-German startup working right here in Brazil. We're deploying a technology called enhanced rock weathering to remove carbon from the atmosphere.
Thank you again for the invitation to participate in this panel. My name's David Manning. You can see from the photograph above me that it's snowing back in the UK, so that's what I'd be wearing if I was back home. It's a bit different here. I am a professor of soil science at Newcastle University in the north of England, and I'm a geologist by background. My career has been in geology. I'm also an honorary professor of soil processes in Edinburgh University, and my interest is in looking at how minerals react in soils on two counts. On the one hand, to supply crops with the nutrition that they need to grow, and that's what first brought me to Brazil some 15 years ago. And then more recently looking at CO2 removal from those same reactions of soils and the minerals reacting naturally within soils as a nature-based solution to the problem of CO2 removal.
Thanks to the InPlanet team for hosting. My name is Injy Johnstone. I'm a research fellow at the University of Oxford, where I work on carbon markets, especially a section with carbon removal measures. I'm a lawyer by training, but I think this intersection between environmental science, law and policy is a fascinating one, and one that we get into in the paper and we'll get into on the panel.
Right, and just a quick word to the panelists about microphones, because as you know, it's very loud here, and we have found over this week and a half from bitter experience that it is best to hold the microphone at the bottom, otherwise you interfere with the signal. Secondly, it's best to hold it almost horizontal like this, because then you're speaking into the microphone, and to hold it very close to your mouth, in fact perhaps occasionally touching your mouth, sadly, in order to be heard on the live stream, which is quite sensitive to the background noise. So let's talk about this paper. And this is a paper which talks about strategic tipping points within agriculture in Brazil. And this is important because we know that we can't get to the scale that we need of carbon removals as expressed by the IPCC, which is between 5 and 10 gigatons per year by 2050. We can't get there if we have linear growth. So we need things that create more exponential type growth, and I think that's one of the reasons, the rationales for the paper that you've done. And we're going to be looking specifically at how enhanced rock weathering can contribute to that. And We're going to be looking at the concepts of high stability and also large-scale adoption. And specifically, we're looking at Brazil as a case study, which has some very interesting specificities. We've also they're very temperamental, so I'm just starting again. We'll also be looking at regenerative agriculture as a theme, and looking at Article 6 tools that could be fueling this transition. So I'm going to start first by diving into the concept of tipping points. So you've all heard of tipping points in terms of planetary tipping points and climate tipping points. That's quite a negative concept, isn't it, Christina?
Almost, yeah, perfect. Yeah, so I think most people, when they hear the word tipping point, they consider a very negative climate tipping point. So something like the loss of the Western Antarctic ice sheet leading to very large-scale changes in sea level rise, and it becomes a kind of negative feedback loop that will end up with something disastrous. What we're referring to here is actually a positive tipping point, so it's a sizable tipping point, where we can get farmer adoption here in Brazil to drive forward regenerative agricultural practices. So this includes things like crop weathering, but also things like soil organic carbon storage and biochar. The reason why we want to focus on Brazil specifically is because there's quite a large potential. I think there's around 19 million hectares of farmland, cultivated farmland in Brazil, and when you add in pasture, that goes to about 300 million. And so if we can get large-scale adoption of regenerative agricultural practices, we're talking about gigatons of removal potential right here in Brazil. Well, in order to do this, we have to incentivize and make it attractive for farmers to take on this practice. And not only that, create a kind of herd mentality. So when a farmer talks to their friend and says, this is great, this does great things for my crops, it's a good idea, then another farmer follows, and another farmer follows, and then hopefully we end up with a tipping point and a shift to where we have large-scale adoption of these kinds of practices.
Thank you, Christina. Can I just ask you to remember to keep the microphone really close to your mouth, because your voice is maybe not quite as loud as mine and needs the extra boost.
Thank you for the reminder.
So the paper talks about the concept of a stability landscape and says that we're currently stuck in a business as usual valley. What does that mean, and what's the approach that you're taking in the paper to thinking about how to take us out of this valley, and how does that integrate to kind of the regenerative agriculture ecosystem?
Yes, great question. So what we mean, hopefully that's louder. It's better? Perfect. So what we mean by that is that farmers are often stuck in their ways and their practices. They've maybe been applying fertilizers and doing certain practices for years. They're very risk adverse because obviously they don't want to have any decline in crop yields or income. And so they're stuck in a kind of business as usual scenario where they just do what they've always done. Whereas what we're proposing in this paper is that we try to drive a strategic shift in mindset where farmers will adopt more sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices. And the framework we put forward in that paper is a sort of AAA framework, we call it, where we make regenerative agriculture affordable, attractive, and accessible to farmers. And I think that's the key for getting large-scale adoption.
Okay, so can you talk us through this term, the stability landscape? What does that mean in a bit more detail?
So by that we mean that that currently, as I said, farmers are in this business as usual stable landscape where they know that certain practices will lead to good outcomes for their crops. What we want to do is shift it to a different landscape where they are also comfortable and happy that it will lead to good outcomes for them.
Okay, so it's a way to describe a social behavior by farmers which relates to the practices that they employ.
Correct, yes.
Great. Super. Thanks. Well, I think I will move on to the next panelist, unless there's anything more that you'd like to leave us with in terms of key concepts from the paper that you wanted to discuss.
I guess the only thing I would add is that companies like InPlanet and other carbon removal companies have a really big role to play here in making sure that they are transparent about the results that they're getting and in driving information sharing with farmers in order to make it clear to them where and when these things can be adopted and when they'll be beneficial for them too. So I think for InPlanet it's something we're very interested in driving as well.
What I like about this is that we're not just talking about carbon removal as a CO2 accounting matter or as an abstract way of getting ourselves to net zero or a number of tons or gigatons or a target. We're talking about it as something which has a social dimension. It relates to how people relate to each other and how they think about what others are doing. And I think that's really important for us to consider as we think about how we get to that scale, how we transform economies and societies. So yeah, thank you for that. So, Professor Manning, I think there's, the paper talks about some specific aspects of Brazil's culture and history, which make it particularly useful as a petri dish, as a place to experiment the kind of approach that InPlanet is talking about. Can you talk us through those particular characteristics?
Yes, indeed, and it all boils down to the science of the reactions which take place and the research which dates back in Brazil to the 1950s. So this approach of looking at how soils generate themselves, how the rocks that go into the soil are weathered to produce that soil, is something that has been very well known in the community in Brazil for 75 years. And it's something from which we can learn, which is what brings me to Brazil. It's not to teach, it's to come here to learn. The important thing about that has been that there's been a gradual coalescence of the community of scientists who are working on this, working with the farmers, to come up with a model and then turn that into action through what's called the Rochagem movement. And that started maybe 15 years ago officially. It led in 2013 to federal regulations being created in Brazil to allow these rock products to be registered for use in agriculture. So there's a rigorous standard here in Brazil that allows rocks that can be mined and crushed and used on soils for the purposes of nutrient supply to the plants. Something unique, the microphone played a trick on me there, something that's unique to this country, and that's what we're pleased to be part of. Of course, I see a question coming.
I think the microphones are quite sensitive to the humidity from our mouths, sadly, so if you need to talk for too long, it shuts you down. Yeah, so the question I had was, you used the word Rochagem. Can you spell that and tell us more about what it means?
Okay, well, the best English translation would be rocking, so we're rocking tonight in Brazil. It's the process of how do you use rocks for a particular purpose. So the agem suffix is used in lots of things in Brazil and in Portuguese, and it's how do you use rocks for a particular purpose, in this case, a system of using rocks to provide crop nutrition. That's where this comes from.
Okay, so the idea of using rocks to support agricultural activity in Brazil is something which is quite old. It's been around for a long time. It's a kind of social agricultural movement which has existed and has history here. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, it has a history. And we have to remember that Brazil is one of the world's largest producers, the fifth largest producer of food in the world for export. And that feeds 10% of the world's population. So agriculture in Brazil is enormous. Yet that is only 10% of the farmers who are participating in that global trade in commodity crops. The other 90% of farmers are providing the food which we're eating here in Belém, the food that we find on the markets, those farmers find it difficult to be able to buy the fertilizers that they need because of the price of the fertilizer and all these other things that farmers complain about, quite rightly. And so the Roche movement is engaging with them in particular to help them find alternatives of soil nutrition. The large commodity crop producers are part of an economy that is a bit different. They are part of the fertilizer importing economy. They're able to cope with that because of the scale of their operations. So Roche is more of a social movement in some ways, that's aimed at alleviating poverty, and particularly alleviating poverty in disadvantaged groups and in small farms where very often the farms are run by women rather than by men. So it has a very different social background and basis. It's sort of coming of age now with the work that InPlanet's doing, and you can see that it's got the opportunity to take off and scale by being used more widely by different farmers.
Thank you. So the rock weathering that we're talking about, so we're talking about taking rocks, turning them into a powder and applying them to fields. How does that interact with other kinds of soil health practices that are prevalent here?
Yes, it's a nature-based solution, as I say, in that it's repeating or reproducing what happens naturally when crushed rock goes into the soil through natural mechanical erosion. The beauty of working in Brazil with this is that the cost of crushing the rock is very low because of the predominance of hydroelectricity in the energy mix here. And it's remarkably cheap to crush rocks. It takes the same carbon to crush a rock as it does to create a litre of milk in the supermarket. So the carbon costs come in mainly in the distribution costs, and that's why this is a case of a system which has local rocks for local people. The rocks don't need to travel very far, they're mined and used locally. So from that point of view, it is holistically a very attractive solution for farmers because it's not involving some of the expenses that are involved in the commercial fertilizer, the chemical fertilizer market. And so that has various benefits as well.
I think this microphone is determined to not let me talk. But how does the rock specifically interact with, bioinoculants and other types of treatments for soil?
Yes. So when it goes into the soil becomes part of a very complex system where biology is the dominant driving force, and chemical weathering in Brazil as well, with the oxidation that gives you the red soils that we've all seen in and around Belém. And in this, it stimulates the microbial activity. That's the bottom of the food chain effectively. Those microbes are active in the weathering of the minerals, but those microbes are also the food for soil invertebrates of various kinds. And when we look at studies of the way in which the biodiversity of the soil is affected by the application of crushed rock, we see an increase in biodiversity and an improvement in soil health. Now this then ties in with the bioinoculant side of things, and we know that the incorporation of bioinoculants into soya saved Brazilian farmers some $20 billion collectively. That is again part of the same system that having these crushed rocks helps stimulate that biodynamic activity within the soil. So it's a win-win from the point of view of the life that is in the soil and the life that that soil supports.
Great. And then, we here at the CDR Pavilion have been talking about a number of other CDR pathways or approaches or methods, including, for example, biochar, which is readily available today, very mature technology, one of the cheaper ways of doing carbon dioxide removal. Is that like a competitor to enhanced rock weathering, or is it somehow complementary?
Yes, they're complementary. Biochar takes organic carbon into the soil in a very stable form. The thing about rock weathering is that it takes carbon out of the atmosphere in an inorganic form, in a form that is taken out of the biological carbon cycle. And so putting the two together, you get the benefit of both. They don't inhibit each other.
So it seems I have to switch this off and on every single time I use it. And now I see the battery's dead, so maybe I'll just borrow it. Let's just share. Thank you so much. So complementary to other carbon removal methods, complementary to other soil enhancement and soil health practices and agroforestry as well.
Yes, again, it can be used in agroforestry. Some of the very first research on the use of these crush rock powders was done in Germany after the First World War, and it was specifically to provide the nutrition for forest growth. So we know that it's good for trees, and it can be used in agroforestry systems for the benefit of both the trees, which are there as long-term crops, and then the short-term crops that grow between the trees and are harvested.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Professor Manning. I'm going to turn to Injy now to talk about some of the policy and finance aspects of this, including Article 6. So the paper talks about Brazil's National Fertilizer Plan and the new SBCE, which is the acronym for the cap and trade system, which has recently been created in Brazil. And so you're a prominent expert in Article 6. How do you think that international markets, so 6.2 and 6.4 markets, can actually drive this kind of tipping point? Because we're talking here about, kind of a social phenomenon that needs to happen. So how does regulation and how do international norms like that, how can they contribute to creating that social tipping point?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and I think to zoom out on, why we're talking about Article 6, especially, it's a space that there's live negotiations happening here at COP, on what's really interesting about the actual provisions. So the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement actually includes reference, unprecedented reference, to two concepts in international carbon markets, these being sustainable development and environmental integrity. And I think what's really exciting about this pathway is that there's really a way to deliver on both those goals. So that's the kind of framing for all the different types of cooperation that Article 6 houses, whether it's Article 6.2, cooperative approaches, Article 6.4, the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, which is a follow-on from the Clean Development Mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol, but equally 6.8, non-market approaches. And we can see actually with this pathway, there's potential for all three different streams to contribute to helping to scale technologies such as enhanced rock weathering. And we can see this not only in the near term up to the net zero target that is included within the Paris Agreement when it talks about reaching that balance between sinks and sources, but also beyond in terms of how do we get to actually the net negative state that we know we need to in order to pull back from overshoot. So that's the broad context of Article 6. And so while at the fundamental level it's about carbon trading, ultimately it's about unlocking finance. And what's really critical when we think especially about a concept such as tipping points is that if we get those international structures for how we might finance and trade in carbon outcomes, right, that can act as a catalytic force for unlocking new projects. And we can already see that under Article 6.4, that indeed the Clean Development Mechanism actually, as of late last night, there was a huddle and we seem to have landed on a final end date for the Clean Development Mechanism, which is great news for novel pathways such as ERW, which haven't been seen in international carbon markets under the UNFCCC today. But what's really clear, whether we look at Article 6 or we look at Brazil's new emerging framework, is that there's an intention to keep it open to pathways that reach these standards. And so we can see that there's great potential for ERW to trade under 6.2 and 6.4. And then what's really interesting in the Brazilian context is actually it's the first system that integrates together the voluntary market, the compliance market, and new forms of Article 6 trading in a way that's never been seen before. So there is a way for pathways like this to really understand and get to grips with the rules involved in international carbon trading and ensure that those kinds of practices are embedded from the start. And the good news is, as we've heard already on the panel, concepts such as sustainable development, are already met in a lot of different ways, and actually carbon removal as a whole already has an easier time meeting some of the tests like additionality and whatnot. And so we can really see how Article 6, if used responsibly, can be a significant channel for finance and for ultimately scaling these projects on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you for the microphone as well. So, how do you see on a timeline? How do you see this working? Is there a phase where we start off to kind of catalyze the movement, and then there needs to be some kind of maintenance period, or and how do the different how different ways of financing this work on a timeline?
Yeah, well, I think for pathways such as this, I think it's about getting really clear on the cost involved in delivering this. And what's interesting, again, we're seeing this kind of fracture on the market between the kind of conventional forms of offsets, which often trade based on what the market thinks their value is, compared to forms of carbon removal, particularly durable carbon removal, which really trades on what does it cost to get this on the ground and to scale. So it's a lot more honest in that regard, and actually the financing pathways are already more transparent than we've seen to date on the carbon market. And again, that really helps it meet some of the rules under Article 6.4 in particular, which require financial additionality. So I think in terms of the timeline forward, it's getting really clear on those different sources and what kind of financing streams are needed, and then understanding again the implications of Article 6 trading for that. So we know, for instance, under 6.4 you have a 7% haircut in essence, and that can really impact some of the viability of trading as yet. And so I think that the sooner that pathways, that high value pathways such as ARW can get to grips with that system, the easier it will be to help shape the rules in a way that doesn't, that still enables them to make most of the full catalytic potential of international carbon markets. So that's the kind of near term. I think in the next few years we need to see how it plugs in. I hope to see the first projects being registered under the PACM. Indeed, there's out of over 1,000 projects that are in that pipeline, there's only 4 durable CDR projects, so there's huge potential there for the sector to pile in there. And I hope to see that again, the market signal that the clean development mechanism is over, and that we are very much now in this era of both environmental integrity but sustainable development can help unlock that demand for pathways such as ERW.
Thank you, that's great. So I want to come back to Christina. So this is quite a sort of academic paper, quite scientific. You're the head of science for InPlanet, and the other authors are scientists as well. Professor Manning, I think you're a co-author too, so you have a scientific background. How is InPlanet taking this kind of theoretical paper, these thoughts, and turning them into action on the ground? How do you take this, the kind of the social history and the science, and turn it into a business?
You hear me? Perfect. Finally getting the hang of the microphone. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's kind of a number of things that we're doing at InPlanet. I think for us, it's a little bit about just education. So just a lot of education of farmers, a lot of strong stakeholder engagement is one way to kind of put this into practice. So I agree, it's a very academic paper. We hope to get governments and other entities interested via the academic paper, but I think for a farmer, what they really want is to try it out for themselves, see the results themselves, and also talk to their friends and see their friends having had those same results. So for us, it's about trials, so running small-scale trials with farmers and then transparently publishing those results, holding lots of events where we share those results, lots of just stakeholder engagement where we're talking to farmers and presenting that really transparently, let them try it out, and then hopefully that will in practice kind of spread the word, bring more farmers on board. But I think for us, we're only one company, we're quite a small company at the moment, and what we really also need is some support from government. So I think kind of lobbying and policy efforts are going to be really, really important too.
Can I come in there as well and give the academic perspective of how we want to see this go into practice? We have the benefit of being able to work with a huge number of different people at different stages in their careers. We have 3 farms on the university where we can carry out trials in the Northern Hemisphere situation. But more importantly, it's the reaction of students to this. So we have a master's program, for example, in sustainable agriculture and food security, and those students learn about this. They learn about what the content is of this paper and other papers that we've been working on and other academics have been working from, and they take that with them when they graduate and go to wherever it is that they've come from, which may be the UK, but it may be any corner of the world, any country in the world. And we find that the reaction from students when they're learning about this is extremely positive. It's something which excites students and young people to find that there's something that can be done that is innovative, is using science that they've learned, and actually they can see the results and do project work to show that for themselves that it actually works.
Great. Well, that's all that I've prepared in terms of questions, but I know we have quite a large audience here today, and I'm sure some of them will have questions for you, the panelists. So this is your opportunity in the audience to raise your hand and ask a question.
Thank you. I'm Mark Major from the Kuna Climate Centre. It's a question for you, Professor Manning. In your response to the combined impact of enhanced rock weathering and biochar, you focused on the CDR impacts. In terms of the sort of soil health, soil quality, are they also additional or complementary? Can you just clarify that for me?
See if that's working again, yes. There are not many trials that have been done that have specifically addressed that, so that needs to be done. Those are projects which need to be conducted. But because of the function being different, for the way the two materials work in a soil, then there's every indication that they'll be additive and you'll get the benefits of both. And one of the things we've been looking at, which is particularly interesting, is the production of biochar which has these minerals as a component of the biochar, because that then opens the door to developing products that combine the best aspects of both worlds. As far as I know, the community has got as far as figuring out how to make those materials, but hasn't yet done the trials at the scale which would convince a farmer to use them.
Could I just quickly add to that? I think there's also potentially an MRV question as well. So I think combining enhanced rock weathering and biochar, there would need some thought in as to how you do the MRV to quantify the carbon dioxide removal, especially with enhanced rock weathering. So I think more research needs to be done, but I think in theory there's no reason why they couldn't be complementary.
Just to complete, I mean, that seems an important thing, not only the MRV part, but I understand the soil health benefits. It seems like a crucial thing to be able to answer.
Yeah, it's fine.
Sorry. Hi, thank you so much. Nope. Is this? Like this. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Hi, my name is Colleen. I'm a master's student in climate science and policy at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I'm also a climate consultant. My question is primarily for you, Dr. Johnstone, but I really enjoyed your really thorough analysis of AR6 and talking about kind of really the implications. I liked your framing around bringing compliance and voluntary and carbon markets all together. What would you say is kind of the key takeaways more for voluntary markets? I'm thinking about, as a climate consultant, there's a lot more companies now that are interested in CDR, and I don't think AR6 or Article 6 is something that they're aware of or thinking about in conversations. And so what would you say are the largest takeaways or intersections for companies that are wanting to participate in the voluntary market, and kind of what should they be taking away from COP30 in that regard?
A wonderful question. I think what's super interesting, and again, when we think of, Article 6 is the hardest part of the Paris Agreement rulebook to negotiate. It's nearly 10 years on, and those negotiations are still happening just down the hall of meeting room 14. And the reason for that is that it's incredibly complex, but it also touches on, the political interests of a number of countries. What's really interesting when we think about that decade-old timeline is that pathways such as this didn't really exist at, for sure at commercial scale. And so we have seen this risk that some of the rules and early decisions have created a bit of path dependency, which makes it much harder for certain pathways related to carbon removal to actually nest into that system. it's something that the negotiators are becoming more and more aware of. We work on a number of different fronts to help educate on that. For instance, as simple as when the transaction unit is called an Article 6.4 emission reduction. So actually explaining to decision makers and corporates who are also able to buy those that the emission reduction also includes removal. So we see a lot of areas in that specific text where some ambiguity is introduced, and particularly when we get to concepts such as addressing reversal risk and whatnot. Now, in theory, particularly for durable removal, particularly when the MRV has been proved out, there could be some advantages compared to more nature-based forms or other forms of nature-based solutions that have higher reversal risks. If you can show that there is negligible reversal risk, you can terminate post-crediting monitoring, and obviously that lowers the cost of transaction there. But what I would say, so bearing in mind where the state of Article 6 is and how it relates to carbon removal is one thing, but what I think is really critical and what we've tried to do both in the principles for responsible engagement with Article 6 but also subsequent work is really encourage fundamental understanding of the different types of carbon credits that may be out there and that role on the way to net zero. And I think particularly, efforts towards SBTIs, corporate net zero standard 2.0 and whatnot, will really trigger insights at the company level as to how to get more carbon removal and understanding that role that it plays, especially in terms of addressing residual emissions. So I think we've very much moved on from the space of just accusations of mitigation deterrence from investing in removal, because we understand now that we're on a high overshoot pathway. So there's a lot of efforts in that regard. We also released last month guidelines for net zero aligned internal carbon pricing. So I think oftentimes, and particularly in the conventional BCM, we've seen actors first engaging with carbon credits from kind of over-the-counter transactions, whereas I think what we see, particularly when we move up the cost curve to access some of the durable forms of carbon removal, we see corporates doing that deeper work that starts with internal carbon pricing and ends in contributions towards neutralization. So I think that distinction between a neutralization outcome versus a general mitigation outcome under Article 6 will become more and more apparent, and those corporates that are investing early in those or developing those offtake agreements will have much more secure supply of those and are better able to benefit from their role in decarbonizing the value chain, but ultimately also meeting compliance costs, because that's another dimension where Article 6 becomes really important, is say if you have the UK and EU ETS systems both integrating removals but then interlinking between themselves, that conduit that Article 6 provides to actually trade in that cross-border durable carbon removal will be really central. So we have to ensure that the rules are such that those kinds of transactions can be seamless, that we can have that liquidity, not only for compliance markets, but also for that on-ramp where we see corporate decision-making now.
Hi, my name is Karan Mahoka. I'm an economics student based in New York, but I also do market research for 1.5, which is a direct air capture company based in Texas. My question is pretty general about just your outlook on enhanced rock weathering and how, on a cost basis, you see it compete in the market with other technologies that have lower MRV costs, like direct air capture, and how you see the future of the markets looks like. If you mentioned that you think they're complementary, but do you see them like being compartmentalized into different parts of the market, or do you see them competing with each other in the future?
Hello? Perfect. Yeah, it's a really, really great question. I think actually at the moment direct air capture is probably quite a lot more expensive than enhanced rock weathering, just because of the need to put in a lot of new infrastructure. Obviously the price of direct air capture will come down with time, but the fact that you have to build whole machines makes it more expensive than enhanced rock weathering, which makes use of existing infrastructure. So from a scalability perspective, enhanced rock weathering is extremely scalable because you use existing byproducts from mining, you use existing transport networks, and you use spreaders that farmers already have. Where there is some cost implication is, as you rightly said, in the MRV costs. At the moment are quite high for enhanced rock weathering because we have to take a lot of samples We have to monitor intensely because it's a very difficult thing to measure. It's an open system pathway. It's very complicated. I think where we see the cost reduction happening in the future is a reduction in requirement for quite so many measurements. Because once we start to understand different combinations of soil, crop, and climate types, we will be able to extrapolate more and use more modeling to get to good quantification of enhanced crop weathering. So I think the price point will come down. In terms of other CDR technologies with agriculture like biochar, I think the cost is actually quite comparable at the moment, is my understanding. I don't know if David, you have anything to add to that?
I think the only thing I can add to that really is that the use of enhanced rock weathering is a very dispersed practice, so it can be used on farmland over very, very large areas, whereas direct air capture might be more focused on a single point where the capture is carried out, and then there's the carbon capture and storage aspect of it, which has to be focused on the geological formation that can accept the material. So they do different things and they work in different ways, and we need both.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point, and I'll very quickly flip out of my role as the moderator and into a brief foray into being a panelist. As the leader of an organization that brings together all the different CDR pathways, I don't see my members feeling that they compete with each other. They see each of themselves as a part of a portfolio that will be required at a global level. Now, where there will be differentiation is both in terms of the market, so certain buyers of carbon removals will prefer to buy certain types of carbon removal because of geographical or supply chain reasons. Injy, the coffee company, is not going to be buying direct air capture. They're going to be buying biochar and enhanced weathering because of the links with their agricultural supply chain. And similarly, you might find companies that have, long commercial relationships with a particular country, investing in carbon removals in that country because of those links and wanting to support economic relationships and social relationships they have in particular countries. You also have to look at this from a kind of national perspective. So Brazil will have particular strength in biochar and enhanced rock weathering, maybe less so in other types of carbon removals. Austria is not going to be developing marine CDR to any extent because it doesn't have any sea, whereas Malta is an island and they're not going to be doing bioenergy with carbon capture and storage because they have no biomass. So this is something which will depend very much on the country and the buyer. And again, I don't see it as a competition issue today.
Can I just add to that I agree actually as well. I think the scale of CDR we need to get to is so large that we are not going to be able to do it with only one pathway alone, and that we would support all CDR mechanisms, and we're going to need portfolio approaches, and we're going to need absolutely everything to get to the scale that we need to get to. So just saying that I agree with that.
Hi, I'm Hugh Hunt from the Centre for Climate Repair in Cambridge. Is it silicate rock? Is it silicate rock that you're using for the enhanced weathering? And my understanding about silicate is that it eventually the carbon that's captured dissolves and runs out in the water. So does it end up in the oceans, or does it stick in the soils? And in what way does the carbon captured by the silicate enhance is it useful for trees and plants?
Yes, so thank you, Hugh, for that. It's nice to see you again for many, many years. The weathering process is one where the silicate minerals lose their cations. So they've got sodium, calcium, magnesium and potassium in their mineral structure. And they go into solution. They cannot exist in solution on their own, so they exist counterbalancing bicarbonated solution, which any of you can see evidence of when you look at the chemical analysis on the side of a bottle of water that you might drink, or a tin of water that you might be drinking here. So we know that the bicarbonate is an essential part of that weathering process. It then does go into the soil solution, and there the questions begin. Where does it go after that? There's a lot of evidence that it goes into groundwater, and in groundwater reservoirs, it will stay there in the water for hundreds of thousands of years. There are some really, really good studies of the groundwater systems in São Paulo state in Brazil, where water from basalt aquifers provides the drinking water for tens of millions of people, and there bicarbonate is the only natural anion that's present. That's work done by Gassmans and his colleagues in that part of Brazil. So the model in an Antwerp weathering is that it goes to the ocean, and in the ocean it helps contribute to improving ocean alkalinity. So we've got these two pathways. We don't know what the relative importance of each pathway is yet.
I know there are hands up for questions. You've got the microphone. Go for it.
Yes, great. I'm Sean. I'm from Norway, and I wanted to ask you a question about the potential of interoperability of markets, especially because there's like geographic. We were discussing about geographic segregation of methodologies. What about like having the chance of purchasing credits from other markets and requiring credits from other markets from other type of methodologies? That would eventually help companies to address their requirements.
Is it a question about how the interoperability may function?
Well, how it would function and if you see it as a viable opportunity.
Absolutely, and I think what's one really interesting opportunity provided through the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism is this opportunity for methodologies to be approved and to become a standard set by the PACM, but that can be traded in any type of market. So it could be a standard that a compliance offset market like Singapore sets to have as a minimum criteria threshold, but it could be common even if you're not trading via Article 6. So that helps build the bridges of fungibility. And so for different pathways, and as you can see, there's a lot of them. I think it would be really sensible to kind of converge on a best practice pathway that gets approved or has a methodology approved by the PACM, and then that can really help to streamline interoperability across different jurisdictions. And it's interesting because, again, we've seen some nods towards that in the indications of integration into the emissions trading schemes. We've seen some kind of minimum, longevity thresholds of several centuries be signaled and start to be embedded into policy, and so I think that gives a clear steer on what type of methodologies could be helpful. But again, as part of that, just because there's different methodologies, we do really need to have that portfolio approach, and obviously not all methodologies will suit some jurisdictions, but the more fungibility we can have through common frameworks, through potentially the PACM, that can help.
Great. And the second part of the question is, what do you think is which kind of role do you think it will play having insurance models protecting the buyers in order to restore credibility in the voluntary carbon market? For example, at Foresight in Norway, we're trying to centralize the risk management and the MRV in order to guarantee the buyer the highest quality and the highest auditing access to auditing for each single project. How critical do you think that insurance, how critical will be the role of insurance in guaranteeing the interoperability of the market?
Yeah, insurance comes into this in a number of different ways. In fact, we've seen some coverage like Kita and Oka come into the market, and they've identified, I think, up to like 15 different types of risks that can be involved in carbon credit transactions. Not all types apply to different pathways, but what's really interesting is that from a practical reversal risk standpoint, definitely insurance plays a role, particularly for the nature-based pathways, to help ensure some of that longevity. Obviously, they haven't yet been tested, and especially in that article, their introduction has been controversial. It's something that the supervisory body, advised by the methodological expert panel, is still working through, because there's been some discussion about having a kind of 100-year minimum guarantee, and that the only way to do that for some pathways is through an insurance-based mechanism. However, for forms of, say, carbon removal, durable carbon removal, insurance could also come into play, but almost from a political risk insurance perspective, to guarantee a corresponding adjustment, should that be necessary, which is necessary, for instance, to unlock the CORSIA market, which is another one of those kind of floating markets, but one that could be hugely profitable for durable carbon removal, simply because of significant demand from aviation as a source of significant residual emissions.
before I just wanted to ask a question myself. So I'm Beatriz, and thank you so much for the panel so far and for the study. It's so really enlightening and very well done. So my question is, if we agree that enhanced rock weathering and regenerative practice require social tipping point rather than incremental credit purchases, what is the single most binding constraint today preventing that positive tipping point in Brazil, and which actor is best positioned to unlock it?
Great, yeah, fantastic question. I think I'll just make sure I've understood the question correctly. So you want to understand what's the best kind of actors or set of actions that could be taken in order to unlock that strategic tipping point to get widespread adoption of regenerative agricultural practices. So I would say that something like governments or large research institutions like Embrapa, for example, putting out materials and research trials to support the use of these practices in a way that is safe and beneficial for farmers. So I think there are combinations where we can really maximize the impact for farmers and maximize the impact for crops. And so I would say, yeah, the single most important thing, actually, not just small startups like us doing work and publishing our results, but actually someone very credible like the research institution at Embrapa or governments coming out and publishing results from their own trials and saying this is a really great thing to do, this is how you can do it, and this is how you can do it well as well, for me would be one way to do that. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I think the thing I'd like to add to that is the growth in participation in the conferences as a whole through Washagen, and how that has really engaged with the farming community that we're targeting in that context. The most recent congress in Casacaba early this year had about 300, 400 people, something like that. It's also supported by an organisation called AgriZone, which is a consortium of people of industry partners with an interest in that topic, who are very good at liaising with the farming community. So the message, there are tools here for getting the message across, and we're seeing it growing like a snowball. So the question you're asking really is, how can we get that snowball to grow faster? And I think that is part of the challenge behind this paper, is to get people to talk about that and to think about what we can do to really make it easier for farmers who are interested to find out about the benefits that their peers have encountered in their farming. We as academics can't really do that very well because we speak a different language. In industry, you maybe seem to have particular biases as well. So it's up to the farmers to self-organise, and they seem to be doing that. So I'm quite optimistic that we'll see this start to snowball more rapidly through natural processes of that kind.
Well, yeah, just to complement these perspectives, I think another really interesting gap, especially when we're talking about this science policy interface, is that right now it's not integrated well into integrated assessment models. And so, that I think could be something, like unlocking it at that level, could then help feed it to also incentivize governments to really back it under their MDCs, provide clear removal targets, and that can give a clear signal both to the market, but also, hopefully can flow down and across different laws that we need, to actually get this moving. Because I think it's very difficult if trying to organize it from the bottom up, we need to have these top-down signals as well. And I think there's real potential through pathways like this that the two could meet in the middle. But that work is underway at the IPCC, and at the State of CDR report as well. We increasingly are modeling kind of both deployment of various pathways, but also how they then feed into addressing the CDR gap that we know exists and continues to widen.
So I wanted to come back to this point about direct air capture and the enhanced rock weathering and make a comment about that. The reason I was asking about the soil health things is because in my experience of like 30 years on trying to generate systems change, All these other benefits and the cultural, economic and political context of the methodology is really, really important. And I would, as a new community working on CDR, don't forget those kind of other aspects. That would be kind of, for example, forestry. The reason forestry is done at such scale is not because of the CDR benefits, it's because it's got a lot of support for rural incomes, employment, biodiversity, water system management. That's the reason why it's being done at such scale. And it's, different methodologies have different factors, different economics, but it's a very important thing about these other, from an outsider's perspective, one of the disadvantages of direct air capture is it doesn't have all of these other kind of social, economic, broader benefits, which plays into political support, which makes things viable. So, I completely get they're not competing, but they have very different features, and particularly I was interested to hear about the historical and cultural backgrounds in Brazil. This sounds like a fabulous advantage in trying to advance something, because that plays into the politics, acceptability, social factors, everything. So that's, I wanted to make that comment.
I can also briefly comment on that. So we had a session yesterday in which we were discussing co-benefits and how they should be used by the community in terms of building support for carbon removals. And the point was made that I think I made it. It must have been brilliant. The point was made that that what will push one country to invest in a carbon removals industry is not the fact that its neighbor has invested a lot of money in producing CDR for its NDCs and thinking, oh look how much progress my neighbor has made toward its climate targets. No, it will be, well, look how many benefits my neighboring country has from strengthening its steel industry, its paper industry, its food industry, its agricultural industry, its waste treatment industry, its construction industry, and on and on and on, and all the other industries that can be strengthened by integrating carbon removals. And I think that's what you're getting at in your paper, right? Is that there's a sort of social tipping point, and hopefully that social tipping point is not something that happens just within the agricultural community within Brazil, but it's also something that happens on a planetary scale as societies look at the benefit of doing carbon removals and see those across borders. I wanted to say something else, but now the microphone has distracted me, so I've lost my train of thought.
Just to be explicit, that means that the economic incentives are only part of the reason the countries will take action. These other benefits are very important as well, right? So some CDR will take place because it economically makes sense. Others will take over. The economic incentives from the markets is just a contributing factor to making it a good idea.
Yes, I think we need to think about human psychology, both at a local scale and at a planetary scale, and what makes people and politicians want to do certain things. I now remember the other thing I wanted to say. People have often said direct air capture has less co-benefits than other carbon removal pathways. I mean, I know that there are, we're an increasingly urban society, and particularly at a time of, climate change and increased heat and cold and rain, etc. What happens in buildings is increasingly important, and the built environment is a place where you could do a lot of direct air capture in ventilation systems, air conditioning systems, etc. And if you build the infrastructure properly, that would be a real co-benefit, as your meeting rooms are now more, you have lower levels of CO2, you're collecting biogenic CO2, and hopefully you can store that as well. So direct air capture might not just be something that you build in the desert in Texas, it could be something that you build into your urban fabric. Another question?
I'll just add to that, because you can have enhanced rock weathering in the city as well. So we do a lot of work on urban soils and designing a carbon capture function to those urban soils. We've measured removal of 85 tonnes of CO2 per hectare per year as calcium carbonate forming in the soil. And that is as a consequence of keeping the demolition rates that might be there after redevelopment, as part of redevelopment activity. that material being kept being kept in the soil. So it's helping to close the loop on the CO2 emissions for the cement manufacture in the first place. But the quantities of rock and crushed concrete and things like that you can use in a city or alongside a highway or alongside an airport runway is enormous compared with the amount that you would use in agriculture. So it has lots of great potential.
Enhanced rock weathering specifically, you mentioned that it's an open system pathway, so that makes it hard to measure how much carbon is going back into the soil. Do you see any potential for AI to help with these challenges and make it easier to measure it? And do you see that happening in the near future, in the next few years?
Perfect. So the question was whether or not AI can help with the MRV question in enhanced rock weathering. I would say definitely yes. We're a little ways away from that at the moment. At the moment, we're in a very intensive data gathering phase where we're just gathering as much data as we possibly can. But some place where AI might play a role is maybe in some kind of machine learning model we might be able to produce where we can predict what our outcomes are in certain areas, and I would say definitely it would be something that we would be interested in incorporating. I don't know if you have anything to say.
I don't know. Was there competition?
Yeah, no, it's your turn, but I don't know if they want to talk anymore.
We'll let the panel go first. Hi everybody, I'm John from the Lego Group. I had a question about how this can scale and whether you think that at some point the co-benefits can be so strong. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Whether you think that at some point the co-benefits can be so strong that this can happen without issuing carbon credits and getting the revenue streams from the credits. The reason I say that is subject to how you look at it. If we look ahead, I mean 1 gigaton, 12 gigatons, 20 gigatons, 50 gigatons removals needed to stabilize the climate. We can't probably pay for that. So one could also think that we would need to find a way where we don't have a carbon price, but we actually get so smart that we implement the measures without taxing the economy, you can say. Is that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Take a second. There we go. Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and this is the big question of scale because it scales like in the way that you just described. So from that point of view, we have to think about what are the benefits to the farmer, the co-benefits and the incentives, and I think we'd find that that will provide enough momentum for people to purchase it. We often talk to farmers who buy rock dust now and have no interest in enhanced rock weathering, but they're interested in the benefits they see for themselves. So there's one particular farmer I know, and he buys 2 or 3 truckloads every. We say to him, why do you buy this? What's the benefit for you? And he says, well, I see 3 things. And this is in the Northern Hemisphere, so it's a different situation to what we have in Brazil. So his biodiversity has gone up on my farm, so he sees more worms in the soil, more earthworms and things like that, and more birds eating them. My cows are happier, which is not a question we've ever asked in a scientific study. And the third point is that he sees his vet bills have gone down. And it's the saving on his vet bills that gives him the money to spend on the rock dust, and he links the two. And we know informally from conversations with various people who are involved with rock dust and working with farmers very, very closely, especially in Africa, that it really does help with animal health in more ways than one.
We discussed this question of the co-benefits being so valuable that they eventually cause a problem with additionality and sort of kill off additionality and therefore kill the possibility of getting carbon removal credits yesterday. But ultimately, I guess that's kind of where we want to get to, right?
Yeah, just to add to that, obviously the question of additionality is one we've had a lot, being here in Brazil where some people use rock putters already. At the moment, less than 1% of farmland in Brazil use rock putters, and even when they do, it's typically at a lower application rate than what we would be applying at. So at the moment, we need carbon finance to really start deploying it and coming to a scale where we have a climate beneficial effect. So Brazil does have a national fertilizer plan, in which they want to incentivize the use of rock fighters, but that incentivization falls well short on what we would consider a climate relevant target. We actually need to be deploying a lot more than that to get to a climate relevant target, and that's where carbon finance can play a role at the moment. I would agree that at some point the co-benefits are so strong, yes, it should be something that's just integrated into agricultural practice. But right now, we're nowhere near that scale. And so I think carbon finance and the voluntary carbon market has a really strong role to play, and an additional role to play as well, especially in Brazil for carbon removal.
Yeah, just to add here, governments have also been missing in action in a lot of this space, right? We've seen voluntary demand be a really key source of catalyzing these different technologies and really, stimulating demand and showing these proof of concepts and showing this additionality and things. But we do expect this transition to compliance, to large purchasing programs, and that will bring down costs. But I think we'll always have a need to be able to kind of measure and really assess the benefits of what's happening. But I think for certain pathways, I think and would hope that those co-benefits do start to outweigh the carbon costs. And I think we're seeing in the nature-based space, a lot of discussion there, and we're seeing nature targets and things arise, and so we're starting to look at nature in a more encompassing manner, and I think other pathways are ripe to that as well. I do have to apologize because I have to move to the next one, but it's been a privilege to be here. Thank you to InPlanet and the team, and thank you, Chris, for moderating. It was great to be here.
Thank you, Injy, and see you soon, I'm sure, maybe at the next panel. Where are you going now? Mediterranean Pavilion, if you want to see Injy in a few minutes when we finish here. Any further questions from the audience?
Hi, getting back to the MRV question again. I think I'm remembering the silicate absorbs about 0.3 tons of carbon dioxide per ton of rock. And I'm just wondering whether you can say that ultimately it will do that if you leave it in the soil, or is the figure just not done in practice? What people have done?
So that is driven by the thermodynamics of the reaction, and again, this is very well known. It's been known empirically for nearly 100 years with the voltage series of mineral reactions. So that is borne out by more recent thermodynamic calculations. So yeah, we do know that.
We know it actually happens in the soil.
Yeah, we see that.
Rather
Yes.
than in the lab.
Yeah, we know it happens.
So how do you measure that?
Because you can measure it in a number of different ways. You can look at it from the point of view of the relic trace elements of their oxides, like titanium, for example, which is their titanium oxide. The time count approach that Yale has pioneered is one which gives you a way of measuring the amount of titanium that's there that tells you how much of the rock is actually wet. So there are things like that you can do, but you can actually go in and have a look at the soil, and you can use good old-fashioned microscopy and have a look at how much rock is there after a period of time. And you can see the disappearance of the rock fragments in the soil.
Over what time scale then? Is that days, weeks, months, years?
Climate, there we are over there, yes, it does depend on the climate. So in what our university fields, it will take 5 years, but in Brazil you'll see it happening in the more oxidizing environments within a couple of years, and the higher temperature of course helps enormously.
Check. Great. May I add something about like co-benefits? We keep concentrating on the short-term scope benefits of actually deploying these kind of technologies. I come from also, before working in carbon, I was like working on the Lloyd's market. Swiss Re already 6 years ago now said we are expecting at 1.5 degrees global GDP loss between $5 and $15 trillion per year by 2030. That is not a limited amount of money, it's a huge bunch of money, and that's basically an indirect cost that not just companies are paying for, but even private citizens, especially the most vulnerable ones. So climate adaptation is not just going through concentrating on the short-term benefits and co-benefits of actually these kind of technologies. We have to consider the indirect impact on every company.
I think that's true. Yes, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Christina, but I think we're basically in agreement with you there.
Yes, I'm Larkin from Lingo, the Human Underground Initiative. Since you're talking about gigaton scale, I wanted to point to the potential in the building sector to use carbon fiber stone to replace cement and steel, which has stone dust as a byproduct, and I think that the building sector is huge to bring that to a gigaton scale. And yeah, we're working. There's some initial work that's very small scale, and we're working on scaling that with Chinese partners at the moment. And I think once that reaches mass adoption, I think that could be a very significant contribution to making that happen, and having the stone dust as a byproduct, as a waste product for free. So if you're interested in where that technology is at, you can talk to Kolja, the stone vendor, who also has some sessions here as well.
Yeah, that works. The important thing you mentioned there is the word waste. This is not involving a waste material, because the materials that we're using for enhanced rock weathering have to meet a particular specification. And so they are not waste from that point of view. And so we have the regulations in Brazil which have defined the specification for rocks which can be registered with MAPA as a product that can go onto fields. That material has to meet those specifications, and each delivery of that material has to meet those specifications. So we're talking about a very different thing here. But what you do describe is interesting, because what it means is that you've got a change in the dynamics of that industry of producing these rocks. So for the scale up that we need, if we are looking simply at the rock dust that's produced as a byproduct of construction aggregates, then it will never scale to the extent we want. What we're going to need is to see the development of an industry that takes those rocks with this product being the primary product, and then the construction materials become a secondary product. And that is an interesting way of turning things around. But it's going to have to do that to scale, because there simply isn't the production capacity at the present time.
Well, Kolja is going after the steel and cement industry, so you can replace concrete reinforced, or steel reinforced concrete with a carbon fiber stone. So I think the scale, once it gets to that point, the scale will be there too.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, thank you so much. I think, just to sum up, I think we've talked about very interesting academic work on the benefits of enhanced rock weathering to agriculture in combination with other types of regenerative and sustainable agricultural practices here in Brazil. We talked about the particular social and economic context of agriculture here, and a historical context here of agriculture in Brazil. We've talked about how that links with financing mechanisms and Article 6. We've had a very rich discussion about carbon removals and different methods and co-benefits and human psychology and tipping points. So thank you very much to InPlanet for stimulating such a rich discussion with this paper, and to the audience for adding your intellect and your curiosity through the questions. It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much, and see you for the next session, which starts at 3:30 and is looking at a different aspect of regeneration through carbon removals.